Look, we're live, Facebook Live, here we are, Tuesday, 12:30, every Tuesday here for you. My name's Dr. John Robinson.
And I'm Christina Bosch.
And we are...
The Sex Docs.
The Sex Docs.
We're going to get the hang of this. This is our visual aid incorporation. So again, feedback welcomed.
Yes, we've had people say, let's get some more visuals, so that's what we're doing today. And as you can see here behind us, actually we're going to start right here with this one. So oxytocin.
The love hormone.
That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yep.
Really excited about this. All these topics always are amazingly exciting for us. Certainly with the topic of sex is always interesting, and how this all helps to enhance your life. So
let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Well, let me go. Some other housekeeping things here. Another visual. Definitely, please share this video. So as soon as we're done here today, and remember we go for about 20 minutes or so, as soon as we're done, please share this video with friends, family, someone you think might benefit.
Yeah, this is a great way to get the word out that we are meeting every Tuesday, and we've had a lot of new followers, so we thank you for that.
Share the video. All right. So there's that. What else we have? Oh, turn on notifications. We've been told to continually remind everyone out there, turn on those notifications so you know that we're going to be talking every Tuesday at 12:30. So again, oxytocin, the love hormone. Let's get into a little bit about what that's about today.
Mm-hmm.
So
oxytocin is not that well known.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that most of us out there have heard of oxytocin. I think we think of it in pregnancy, but really this is a love hormone that is produced in men and women. Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit about what it does.
So what do you mean in pregnancy? What does it do in pregnancy?
So one of the things that oxytocin helps you do is decide that you will ever again have more than one child, essentially. And what that means is that when oxytocin levels rise, which happens during labor, and especially when you see your baby for the first time, it increases the emotions of bonding. It increases that sense of ownership for the little one that you just brought into the world. It also helps to decrease pain, and it also helps to loosen soft tissue, which allows your pelvic area to open to facilitate the birth of a child. As
well as contractions then of the uterus as well. Indeed. During the actual birth.
Yeah. And those points are points that we are going to then illustrate how they help us in times other than labor for the same benefits, right?
Right,
okay,
right.
So
here are some of the basics behind what it's doing. So it's definitely helping with bonding. That idea that Dr. Bosch was just saying, that Christina was just saying, it helps us to bond not just with our children, but within other relationships. So if oxytocin isn't as high as we'd like it to be, it could be, maybe, we have some issues with bonding in social situations as well.
Right, exactly. So one of the reasons that a patient would be asking about oxytocin, well, I take that back. I don't think most people would be asking about oxytocin,
it's
but perhaps
but
perhaps we'll notice those patients that come in and say that because they're so stressed out in their life right now and other hormonal things are still being managed, that they may find that they're having a more difficult time during their intimate moments, and they'll say something like, oh, I've got this romantic anniversary celebration scheduled, what would you recommend? And we would recommend perhaps some oxytocin.
Perhaps, and we can go into a little bit more detail now, which would be similar to the detail that maybe we'd go in with the patient about exploring a little bit more of what's going on. Right. I will tell you, I had a patient maybe a couple of weeks ago who was basically just, well, I guess a couple of weeks ago she came back and told me the improvements, but prior to that she was just saying she just, she loved her husband a lot, but just really didn't want to have anything to do with him for the most part. In terms of interactions, in terms of touching and physical. She said the same thing about her children, two kids that were teenagers, same thing, just kind of didn't want to have anything to do with them. Even though she had a lot of love and the relationship was great, so it was just sort of that willingness to have a social bond was really low. Anyway, she came back a couple of weeks ago, and after we had started with some oxytocin prior to some testing, that
was enhanced.
Fantastically, it was a big change for her. So,
okay, well, bonding and optimism, that's another thing that kind of goes hand in hand. The more you feel that sense of loving for others, and the more you feel that sense of loving for life, it's a lot easier to see that glass as half full. So when we're being a little bit more optimistic in the world, with the world, we can definitely make that a contagious emotion. And this is applicable again, not just towards our loved ones, but think about when you're in business and in negotiations. If you're having a hard time making that connection with potential clients, you may be in an oxytocin deficiency state, or you may just benefit from a little bit of oxytocin in the system. Not sure why I'm so tongue twisted, but all right, let's move on.
I didn't even notice. I was gazing at you, and I didn't even notice.
This is prelude. Yes, very good. Foreshadowing.
Okay, so what else does it do? It affects the idea of fidelity in men. So what some of the science is showing us about oxytocin, it does affect men and women a little bit differently. Here's one way it affects. Obviously, it is affecting that idea of connection for men with their mate. And one other thing about the difference between oxytocin in men versus women is, for women, oxytocin will actually help to calm women down. They'll take that emotional response that tends to, for women, be kind of high, and it'll help to kind of modulate that down. Where men often, not always, but often tend to have a emotional response that's a little bit low, and it helps to bring them up. So it's interesting to see that as we're getting into understanding more about oxytocin, that actually does have different effects for men and women.
Yeah, and how wonderful the concept that if you can bring women a little bit lower here and men a little bit higher here, then maybe we're able to meet a little bit more in the middle, which is one of the ways that fidelity is also enhanced, is that if you can have a little bit more harmony and a flow, just ease of flow in your loving relationships.
And that communication, I think, happens when things start to even out.
Yeah, getting on the same page.
So it increases libido, it increases erections, and it increases orgasms. So bonus is one of the key things that we've seen people have improvement with.
Yeah, and then the idea with the orgasm is that keeping in mind that if you're always looking at your health in a holistic fashion and you're evaluating all of the hormonal imbalances that may exist, oxytocin can often just be a little bit of that icing on the cake to really help the quality of your orgasm be improved.
That's a good point. We don't always start with oxytocin as the first thing. Normally it's sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. But because, again, at the hormone zone, we're so much more comprehensive in how we approach things hormonally. Sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone, that's just the icing on the cake where we start, and then we might need to do something more.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else does it do? This is a big thing, and this is something you've definitely had a lot of success with your patients. It helps with fibromyalgia and pain.
Right. Yeah, this is huge. Just a quick little anecdote. We do have several patients, but I can think of one in particular that was a fibro patient that I have been working with for years. And I said, let's just try it. It's easy, it's non-invasive, it's economical. Let's just try doing an oxytocin. And I speak with 100% sincerity when I tell you that that patient needed only one oxytocin injection per year to keep her fibro flare-ups completely gone. It doesn't mean she still didn't have that unfortunate baseline of achiness that was for the most part resolved through general health, but those fibro flares that would hit her every time the weather changed or every time stress came about, with that one oxytocin shot a year, she was able to keep those at bay.
For those that don't know, what is fibromyalgia?
So fibromyalgia is, well, fibromyalgia, as it would be defined by a conventional perspective, would be a disease that is characterized by chronic fatigue and chronic pain that appears symmetrically bilateral in the body. It is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning they have ruled out other things and they have been able to then say, these symptoms fall into this category. For us, fibromyalgia is almost its own conglomerate of symptoms that really we believe to be an issue, again, of metabolism, predominantly thyroid function.
Yeah, that's the big thing, just since fibromyalgia got brought up. Fibromyalgia symptoms and the symptoms of low thyroid are massively the same. So there's been a lot of sort of research and look in that particular direction about fibromyalgia that's really in the end a metabolic issue, and we're treating the metabolism through hormonal balance and particularly thyroid too. But when those things don't work, oxytocin could be the thing that could make a massive change, particularly for this patient.
Yeah, and again, how does this apply maybe to you readers, to you viewers out there that don't have fibromyalgia?
Some might be reading.
Talking about orgasm makes me think of books I read. I don't know.
Oh, really?
So the body pain is something people will say fibro-like pain. Fibro-like pain. That's a word I've heard a lot. And that may be that person that's got that chronic achiness that doesn't resolve but has never been diagnosed as fibro or as fibromyalgia, but you are having that body pain. Oxytocin, remember what I said about how it's produced during labor. It allows that soft tissue to just relax and kind of unwind a little bit, relieving you of pain and relieving you of tension.
Taking the edge off.
Taking the edge off.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's move on. There's one other page here. So who's most at risk for having issues with oxytocin deficiency? And there are ways to look at oxytocin deficiency clinically. It would just be symptomatically, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But there are ways to actually do urine tests to test for oxytocin levels, and we do that here as well. But who's at risk? Who might be the populations that we're going to look at? Well, anyone with post-traumatic stress disorder has often gone through so much stress that it will start to psychologically affect their ability to bond, their ability to have social interaction.
I'd like to remind everyone out there that the word trauma literally means to break. So when there has been trauma in the body, there are symbolically breaks in function. And what oxytocin is doing is bonding. So it's a wonderful, very simple way to make a connection between I've experienced trauma, therefore I need some repair. And that's where oxytocin will come in. And when we're talking about post-traumatic stress and PTSD, we're not just talking about big major trauma. Post-traumatic stress can be like the idiom, the straw that broke the camel's back. A person can have gone through chronic stressors that are good and bad. The body can't tell the difference, right? The body can't tell the difference. The physiologic response between something good and something bad is the same response. So you can have had a series of stressors. For example, I bought a new home, I won the lottery, I brought a new baby into the house. All of those things can accumulate, have the same physical response. One little thing happens, you lose your job. Big thing, but maybe not PTSD, maybe, and it'll still present as PTSD.
Sure, and I think what you're saying, there's a gradation of PTSD, and oxytocin might be the thing that could help with
regardless.
That. So childhood trauma, what you were saying here, and an autism disorder, I think what's important about that is in autism, children who have, and it's a varying degree of levels that they might have issues with that, whether children or adults, it's all about social bonding. The inability to look someone in the eye is a very, very common symptom that you'll see in autism. And actually, when somebody has oxytocin deficiency, they may actually not be able to look at someone in the eye.
Right. And we always like to say, well, these are the bold examples. These are the common places in which we'll see oxytocin deficiency. But what about that person that will just benefit from a little bit extra oxytocin? Goes back to what you're saying. If you're finding that you're more uncomfortable in social settings than you think you should be or you used to be, it's not autism, but it's a form of that spectrum of perhaps the anxiety spectrum that you would still benefit from some oxytocin.
Sure, and that's a great segue. So that gave you a great understanding and an overview about oxytocin. Now let's get into a little bit, do you think maybe you have an issue with it? First of all, you can always let us know, whether it's contacting us here through Facebook or calling the office if you're thinking you have an issue. But let's go into a little bit more of what some of those symptoms are. And so now it's time for the artiscience of sex. So the artiscience of sex is that segment every time during Facebook Live where we talk about the art and the science and blending those two things together as it specifically relates to sex and what we're talking about here today. So I'll start with the science like I normally do, and that'll be this quick assessment tool. So this is a social phobia inventory. Really, really simple. There's only 3 questions, and what you're going to do is rate this from a 0 to 4. 0 would mean not at all. You don't experience what I'm getting ready to say here. A little bit on a number 1. Number 2 would be somewhat. 3 very much, and 4 extremely or all the time. All right, so number 1. Fear of embarrassment causes me to avoid doing things or speaking to people. So is that a 0? Is it maybe up to a 4? So maybe think about that number now and write it down. Think about that. Number 2, I avoid activities in which I am the center of attention.
Like us.
Yeah, we avoid this all the time, right? So 0 to 4. And then finally, being embarrassed or looking stupid are among my worst fears. And so a lot of patients say these types of things to us all the time. So again, 0 to 4. And you would add all that up, And a score of 6 or more would be highly suggestive of having this type of phobia. And this type of phobia might be massively related to oxytocin deficiency. So whatever you might be, tally that all up. And if you think you want to give us a call, let us know. We're here for you. And maybe oxytocin is part of it. Maybe it's some other hormones. Maybe it's none of it at all. We can figure out what it is together. But it certainly could be oxytocin. So that's the science.
That was an easy one.
Yeah, right?
We liked that.
So now let's talk a little bit about the art.
So we can enhance our oxytocin very easily.
Who can?
One.
Okay.
I definitely can, and I'm going to help John do it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Naturally enhance your own oxytocin levels.
Okay.
Agreed?
I'm in game for anything. How are we going to do this?
This is tough. What I would encourage you to do is find your loved one, a loved one, any loved one. In this case, it's John. And we're just going to stare into each other's eyes.
Like this? Can I blink?
You can blink.
I can blink. Okay.
And just lovingly gaze for as long as you can handle it.
I'm handling this just fine.
You are. You're doing great.
Yeah.
And that, my friends, increases oxytocin.
So just simply staring at someone you love
naturally
helps to increase oxytocin.
It does. Isn't that wonderful?
It's definitely, it might be having an effect.
Oh, goodness. Well, that definitely increases
it worked
my
on
oxytocin.
me. Yeah, right.
So we have no problem bonding, and we have no problem being at the center of attention. And we would want for all of you to have that same or some form of loving sensation that's easily accessible, and gazing into each other's eyes is just as easy as that.
Wow, that was a lot of fun. We've never really done that on camera before, at least that particular way. And I guess I overly related that to oxytocin. So that was awesome. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So here's one thing that we definitely know for sure.
Hormones are sexy.
Hormones are. Oxytocin is definitely very sexy.
Oxytocin is very sexy.
Life is sexy. We're the sex docs. Remember, we're here for you every Tuesday, 12:30 Arizona time, till about 12:50 or so. Next week, what are we doing next week?
Ooh, next week we're doing another very sexy hormone. One of our favorites.
Yes.
The thyroid.
The thyroid.
So thyroid sexy next week. Yeah. 12:30.
12:30 Arizona time. We'll talk about how the thyroid can be sexy too, and if you feel like you're not feeling as sexy as you possibly could be, it could be your thyroid, and we'll talk about that real specifically next week.
Thank you again, friends. Have a wonderful week.
See you next week.